Hi everyone and welcome back to Deansbury. In this episode I'm going to be focusing on back scenes and showing you how I've gone from this to this. The back scenes in the layout are made from MDF sheets cut to size and pinned and glued onto a softwood frame. They actually just rest on the same supports the layout does on the shelving underneath, so they're not attached to the layout. And the main reason for this is it still allows me to take the baseboards down and stack them upright if I ever need to create a bit more room in here. I've painted the back scenes in a mixture of plain white cheap emulsion and a mixture of varying blue acrylics and sort of blue tester pots. I was aiming for a fade effect of the sky, and there's plenty of YouTube videos on this from artists and how to do it in acrylic. Didn't really work out for me. I didn't quite get the fade effect without sort of dragging the paint and getting loads of streaking effect, so I abandoned that and just went with a sort of a plain blue. The clouds are mainly Humbrol white, using a kind of scruffing circular dry brushing motion. Again, I picked this up from another video on YouTube, a sort of artist channel about painting clouds. First sort of attempt really. I'm quite pleased with how they've come out. They were not too difficult to do. I think you can always do a bit more, and I suppose part of the skill is knowing when to stop. But I'm quite pleased with the effect of these, and I've only done down to the point where I think I'm going to be adding some buildings. I've tried to keep the sort of bigger fluffier clouds to the top level and the thinner wispier ones down below. Can always add a few more in if I need to. It's just get the paintbrush out and give it another dry brushing. So what we're going to aim to achieve here is cutting out of the buildings, or a selection of these buildings, from the PECO back scene, and aiming for the ones right at the back to form the far distant skyline. Probably on a 1 or 2 mil cardboard base with a black border painted on, or a dark border painted on. They'll go onto the back scene, and then the ultra low relief cottages, terraced houses, will go on top here and form the sort of the next layer of back scene coming toward the layout, and we'll see how that goes. So the first part of the build is the back of the terrace houses. This comprises a number of parts designed in Inkscape. First off, we have the window back layer. These are the windows taken from the PECO back scene, printed out onto 1 mil card. Then we have a middle layer, which just adds some depth to the house. And finally, a printed brick cover layer, which we need to cut the windows out of and attach to the window layer. When I'm cutting out the windows, I find it very easy to make a small pinprick in each of the corners. This gives each of the cuts a nice clean starting position and allows you to cut things out in freehand without needing a ruler each time. With the exception of the very top edge, each of these cuts are actually hidden behind the house, and therefore makes this process nice and quick. And here we have the finished cutout layer ready to be attached to the back. I do this using Pritt stick normally, and a good covering allows you to slide the paper easily over the card to adjust to final position. Time now to move on to the next elements that make up the house. These have all been designed in Inkscape as well. We have some more brick elements which form the outbuildings and the walls and the window sills for the house. We've also got a selection of gutters and downpipes, and also the tiles that form the roofs of the house. Before finally cutting out the window sills, I score down the middle to allow a nice crisp edge to be formed, and then I can go around touching up the white edges with a watercolour pencil, or any marker pen can be used as long as the colours are a close match. The window sills can then easily be glued in place on the back layer. I just use a dab of Pritt stick here, and that allows me to slide them in position and firmly press the front down. Once this has gone off, they can be folded over, burnished, and then glued in place with PVA from the back. With all the window sills in position, time for a quick test fit to make sure all the windows line up nicely and there's no gaps showing around the edges. Final touch here is to touch in the underside of the lintels with a brick coloured pencil, just to get rid of any exposed edges. Once that's done, the two layers can be PVA glued together and held in place with clamps until dry. Once the glue's dried between the two layers, the remaining brick paper edges can be folded back to give a nice clean finish. Next up we have another printed sheet of base layers. These cover the rear outbuildings of the houses plus the garden walls and some smaller strips to form the guttering. Once these are cut out, these can be covered with the brick paper layers. My first attempt was to glue some cover layers using Yoo-hoo to plasticard strips. This didn't prove successful at all, so I resorted to painting the plasticard in a kind of concretey colour, and then also painted some thin white card in black, and these were to form the coping strips of the brick walls and the roof tile edges of the outbuildings. So the time has come, finally going to bite the bullet and actually cut some of these things out. I think I'm going to just try and get round the skyline here, around some of these. I kind of think I need a break point here somewhere just to make it not too long and thin. First layer of terraces is going to go actually over here, sort of thing. I've left the bottom here, so this is roughly where it's going to sit on the actual the base of the layout along the bottom here, and this will be covered by a strip of wall, hopefully. Something similar in sort of size and scale to this, and I think I'm going to get some fencing to go over there as well, so kind of recreating what's on the back scene but just in several different layers. Hopefully I've got enough depth behind my platform to get it all in, we'll see. I'm going to use this building here as a bit of a break point. I don't know why, I'd been getting really quite nervous about making these cuts, but the back scenes were about £1.50 each, and in the end the cuts were really quite successful and came away with a nice clean finish. So having looked at this again, I think we're going to go with an additional layer. So we're going to have the chimney, the church spire, and then this top row here and these buildings here on the first layer. Then I'm going to glue all of the rest of this on a second layer of 1mm, and then we're going to get the buildings mounted on that, so they'll give us a few layers in the back scene. We'll see how that looks. To fix the back scenes in place, I use Deluxe Materials back scene adhesive. Old brush. Here we go. I applied a generous coat to the back of the back scene using a brush. I'd assume that this stuff dries clear and matte, but that wasn't quite the case, otherwise I'd have taken a bit more care of how I put it on. Once the glue had dried and I'd cut the back scene out from the cardboard, it was time to paint the top edge. To do this, I used a basic mix of some Humbrol colours, Rail Colour 402, a matte 32 and a matte 64. These are sort of a brown, a light grey and a dark grey. Just mixed these up as I went in the colour palette. I just matched them to the surface I was painting to recreate the tiles or the bricks. I just took my time, carefully making sure I didn't paint the front, and tried as best I can to match the colours to either the roof or the bricks. It's not come out terribly well on camera, but I was quite pleased with the result and really did look like he was looking at the edge of the building rather than a flat piece of cardboard. Before I started the gluing up process, I made some rather temporary guides with some masking tape here. These just help keep everything nice and straight and level, and made sure I lined things up with the original background. I attempted then to stick the house back to the back scene with some PVA glue. Unfortunately, the back scene itself had warped when the glue was drying out, and this took a long time and a lot of pressure to secure in position. With the guide rail positioned to align with the other houses, it was then a reasonably straightforward process of attaching the first bit of outbuilding. I then proceeded with attaching all the rest of the trim elements. First up here is a strip of the black card to represent the roof tiles on the outbuilding. Then some very fine diameter plasticard rod painted black. This represented the downpipes for the outbuildings. These were attached again just using small dobs of PVA glue. The process then continued, firstly adding the back walls and then each of the coping strips cut to size. Next I added the guttering on to start forming the roof. This again was attached using PVA and pressed in place using a straight edge to keep it nice and firm and flat to the main building. Downpipes were added in exactly the same way between each of the houses. These helped to break up the scene. These were attached over length and then once dry they were trimmed to suit the length of the building. For the second house I decided to use contact adhesive instead of PVA. Put a generous coating on the back of the house, let it cure for 5 minutes and then turned it over and pressed it into position. This stuck almost instantly and proved to be more successful than the PVA. With the house back securely in position, I could then proceed with attaching the remaining elements to complete the second house. With the houses in position, it was now time to move on to the roofs. I printed out some ridge tiles to add to the top of the roofs to give them a nice defined edge. I wasn't originally planning on doing this, but once I got them in position, I felt they made a real difference. Next step with the chimneys. These were cut from small squares of 1mm card covered in the brick paper. Again, another detail I added to these was a couple of courses of string course at the top, which helped to give a bit more detail to the top of the chimneys. I painted the tops in a sort of cement concrete colour to represent the chimney flaunchings. I think they do stand out a little bit, and it's not come out particularly well on camera here, but the chimney on the left does have the additional string courses, whereas the one on the right is just the plain one. Before I glued the roof tiles in position, I just went along and added a 1mm strip of card above the guttering. This was just enough to lift the bottom of the roof off and create that impression of a pitched roof. With the roofs now done, I could go on and add the chimneys, carefully aligning these with the chimneys in the background. These were secured with a dab of PVA glue. I'm really quite pleased with how that turned out. The chimney pots here are half cocktail sticks, apart from the end one. I had to slice them down the middle because they were just a bit too thick to sit on top of the chimney stacks themselves. But I think I'm very pleased with that effect. I think the chimneys actually kind of really do complete it. So moving now over to the layout, here we have the back scene in approximately the position it's going to go. I'm really pleased with this effect, and from normal viewing distances it does make those row of terraces pop out from the back scene, so it's achieved the effect I was looking for. There's still a bit to do here. I need to get it in the right position, I need to glue it in place, and once I've done that I can add the remaining elements that make this up. I think I'm going to go for a light bit of weathering as well, and certainly the PECO back scene could do with a coat of matte varnish just to tone it down a little bit and maybe take away some of the brightness. But overall, I'm really pleased with this. Well, that concludes my first video on back scenes. In a future video, I'm going to be taking a look at this area behind the depot and gradually making my way along the back of the layout. If you've enjoyed this video, please do leave a comment and a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. I'll hopefully see you in a future episode. Bye for now.